The billionaire's maid requested 8 months' leave without explanation. He didn't understand until he received a call that left him speechless. All the money in the world, and yet I am completely alone. The thought struck Julian Vance as he stared at the photograph held in his trembling hands. He had drunk more than usual, though not enough to cloud his senses, just enough to allow himself to feel the weight of his memories. The image showed his parents, smiling, embracing him when he was barely 5, before ambition consumed his father and cancer took his mother. The silence of the mansion was crushing him tonight more than ever. 38 years old, an incalculable fortune, and no one with whom to share the burden of his thoughts. Vanessa, his fiancée until this morning, had turned out to be just another in the long list of people who only saw him as an opportunity to access his corporate empire. Strategic merger, that's how she had described their relationship in an email that should never have reached him. The sound of soft footsteps interrupted his contemplation. It was late, almost midnight, and all staff should have retired. "Who's there?" he asked hoarsely, not bothering to wipe the solitary tear that had escaped his control. Clara Davis appeared in the library doorway. Her black uniform with a white apron seemed out of place at this hour, like a reminder of the roles they both played in this house. "Excuse me, Mr. Vance," she replied with evident embarrassment. "I didn't know you were here. I just came to look for—" She stopped short, noticing her employer's state. Julian tried to compose himself, placing the photograph on the table and straightening up in the leather armchair. Too late. He had been discovered in a moment of vulnerability by the last person he would have expected. "What were you looking for at this hour, Clara?" he asked, trying to regain some of his usual composure. She hesitated before answering, as if deciding between the truth and a convenient lie. "I came for a book," she finally admitted. "Sometimes, when everyone has gone to sleep, I come here and borrow something to read. I return it before dawn. I know I shouldn't." "I didn't know you liked to read," he interrupted, surprised by this unknown facet of his employee. "There are many things you don't know about me," Clara replied with a sad smile. "Like how today is the anniversary of my father's death." The confession, as unexpected as it was vulnerably honest, created a strange bridge between them. Suddenly, Julian saw something familiar in this woman, who for 2 years had been practically invisible to him. The same pain he carried inside. "I'm so sorry," he said sincerely. "How long ago?" 7 years, she replied, hesitating whether to continue or retreat. "He was a fisherman. An unexpected storm. They never found his body." Julian gestured to the armchair opposite him, a silent invitation that surprised them both. "My mother died when I was 11, he found himself saying, while Clara cautiously took a seat. "Cancer. My father was too busy building his empire to be present during her illness, or during my childhood, really." A silence heavy with emotion filled the space between them. Neither knew exactly why they were sharing these intimacies, but there was something liberating about talking to someone who expected nothing in return. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it," Julian continued, looking at the whiskey in his glass. "All of this, the mansion, the companies, the fortune, if at the end of the day you're alone with your thoughts and your regrets." Clara observed the man in front of her. He wasn't the intimidating business magnate everyone feared and respected. Tonight he was simply a wounded man, as lost as she was. "My father used to say that true wealth is in the moments we share, not in the things we accumulate," she said, surprised by her own audacity. "He died with no possessions, but with 1,000 stories and memories that still make me smile." Julian looked up, meeting Clara's honey-colored eyes. For the first time, he truly saw her. Not as the efficient, discreet employee, but as a woman with her own story. Her own scars. "I ended my engagement with Vanessa today," he confessed, the words flowing more easily than he had anticipated. I discovered that everything was part of a strategy to merge our companies. 3 years together, and she never saw me. Only my last name and my bank account. I'm so sorry, Clara replied with genuine empathy. Not all people are like that, aren't they? The bitterness in his voice was palpable. My experience tells me otherwise. It seems money attracts a particular type of person, none of whom are interested in meeting the man behind the fortune. Clara hesitated, torn between prudence and honesty. Finally, she chose the latter. Maybe the problem isn't the money itself, but where you're looking, she suggested gently. If you always look in the same circles, you'll find the same type of people. The observation, as simple as it was accurate, momentarily left Julian speechless. No one had ever spoken to him with such frankness. And where should I look, according to you? He asked, genuinely curious. In places where your last name doesn't open doors, she replied with a small smile. Where you have to earn respect and affection for who you are, not for what you have. Julian let out a soft, almost resigned laugh. That sounds wonderful in theory, but quite complicated in practice. It's not like I can just stop being who I am. No, Clara conceded. But you could remember who you were before all this. That person still exists inside you. Her words struck him with unexpected force. Who was he before? Did he even remember? And you, Clara? He asked, changing the course of the conversation. Have you found someone who truly sees you? The question seemed to touch an open wound. Clara averted her gaze, fixing it on the Persian rug beneath her feet. I thought so, she replied hoarsely. I was with Marco for 2 years. I thought he loved me for who I was, until he told me that a simple housekeeper had no place in his future, that he needed someone at his level. The irony was not lost on either of them. She, rejected for not being enough. He, valued only for what he possessed. What a pair we make, Julian commented, with a tired smile. Wounded for opposite but equally painful reasons. The difference is you can change it, Clara replied. You have the resources to reinvent yourself, to look elsewhere, to be whoever you want to be. And you don't? My mother is ill, she explained simply. She needs expensive medication and constant care. This job allows me to give her that. My dreams will have to wait. Julian observed her with new eyes, impressed by her strength and selflessness. What dreams are those, if I may ask? Clara seemed surprised by the genuine interest in his voice. I always wanted to study literature, she confessed. Hence my fondness for your books. I started university but had to drop out when my mother fell ill. The conversation continued to flow with surprising naturalness. Two wounded souls sharing their sorrows and longings in the middle of the night, momentarily forgetting the roles that separated them. For a few hours, they were not the millionaire and the employee, but simply Julian and Clara, two people seeking connection in a world that had taught them to distrust. When the clock struck 2 in the morning, both seemed surprised by the time that had passed. I should retire, Clara said, standing up. It was an unexpected conversation, but necessary, he added, rising too. Thank you for listening to me, Clara, and for speaking with such honesty. It's a rare commodity in my world. Thank you for sharing your pain with me, she replied. Sometimes, burdens are lighter when we share them. Their eyes met one last time, and something indefinable passed between them. It wasn't attraction, at least not in the conventional sense, but a mutual recognition, as if both had seen something in the other that resonated deeply. Good night, Julian, she said, using his first name for the first time, a small act of rebellion against the unwritten rules governing their lives. Good night, Clara, he replied, allowing that small familiarity to settle between them like a shared secret, the unspoken bond. The days following that late-night conversation proceeded with a strange mix of normality and tension. On the surface, nothing had changed. Clara continued with her household tasks, serving breakfast punctually, keeping every corner of the mansion impeccable. Julian remained immersed in his business, spending most of the day in meetings and video conferences. But there was something different, an undercurrent that both perceived but didn't mention. The furtive glances when they thought the other wasn't looking. A murmured, "Thank you," with more warmth than necessary. Small gestures that revealed that that night had left an invisible mark on both of them. A week after their encounter in the library, Clara was tidying up the books Julian had left scattered on his desk. It was part of her daily routine, but today something caught her attention. A copy of 100 Years of Solitude with a silk bookmark inside. Opening it, she discovered a note written in Julian's elegant handwriting. "For the literature lover. I thought you might enjoy it." Clara felt an inexplicable heat rise to her cheeks. Was it a gift, or just a loan? The ambiguity of the gesture disconcerted her. For 2 years, she had meticulously worked to keep their roles clear and defined. He, the unreachable employer. She, the efficient and invisible employee. Now, that boundary was beginning to blur. That same afternoon, while serving tea in the garden where Julian was reviewing documents, she gathered the courage to mention the book. "I found your note in 100 Years of Solitude," she said softly, placing the cup in front of him. Julian looked up from his papers, and for an instant, Clara could see vulnerability in those blue eyes that usually reflected determination and control. "It's one of my favorites," he replied. "I thought maybe we shared that taste." "I've read it 3 times, she confessed with a small smile. "But I've never owned my own copy. I always borrow them from the public library." "Then it's yours," Julian stated, with a naturalness that contrasted with the unusual gesture. "Consider it a thank you for listening to me the other night." Clara wanted to refuse, to explain that it wasn't appropriate, that she expected nothing in return for that conversation. But something in Julian's expression stopped her. It wasn't condescension or charity she saw on his face, but a genuine desire to connect, to prolong that moment of honesty they had shared. "Thank you," she simply said, unable to add anything else. He nodded and returned to his documents, but Clara noticed how his shoulders had relaxed slightly. It was as if both had crossed some kind of invisible barrier and were now in unknown territory, without maps or guides. That night, while preparing dinner for Julian, who had canceled a business appointment claiming fatigue, Clara couldn't stop thinking about the strange evolution of their relationship. What exactly was happening? Was it simple kindness born from a moment of shared vulnerability? Or was there something more? Her thoughts were interrupted by Julian's unexpected arrival in the kitchen, a space he rarely frequented. "Excuse the intrusion," he said, stopping at the threshold, as if unsure of his welcome in that domain. "I just wanted to know if you needed help." The question was so absurd that Clara almost dropped the spoon she was stirring the sauce with. Julian Vance, heir to a corporate empire, offering to help in the kitchen? "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, unable to hide her surprise. "Although I admit I never imagined seeing you in the kitchen." "There are many things you don't know about me," he replied, unconsciously using the same words she had spoken in the library. "For example, I studied cooking in Paris for a year, before my father forced me to return to take over the family business." This revelation stunned Clara. The image of the ruthless businessman who appeared on the covers of financial magazines didn't fit with someone who had pursued a passion as mundane as cooking. "Why did you never mention it?" she asked, genuinely interested. Julian shrugged, finally stepping into the kitchen and leaning against the counter. "It never came up," he replied, though both knew it was more complex than that. "Besides, it's part of a life I had to abandon." There was resignation in his voice, but also a hint of rebellion that Clara found surprisingly attractive. "Do you miss it?" she asked, returning her attention to the sauce to hide the blush she felt rising on her cheeks. "Every day," he admitted with an honesty that disarmed her. There's a freedom in creating something with your own hands that doesn't compare to signing contracts or closing deals, however multi-million-dollar they may be. Clara nodded, understanding that feeling perfectly. For a few minutes they worked in silence, she finishing the sauce, he observing her with a mixture of curiosity and something harder to define. "Can I taste it?" Julian finally asked, leaning closer. Clara stiffened, offering him the spoon with a portion of sauce. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, a fleeting but electrifying contact that sent shivers down Clara's spine. He seemed to feel it too, because their eyes met for an instant charged with tension. "Delicious," he murmured, not taking his eyes off her. "You have talent." "It's just a simple recipe," she replied, suddenly aware of the proximity between them. "Sometimes simple is the most extraordinary," Julian said, with a smile he rarely showed in public. "Like our conversation in the library." The comment hung between them, a direct reference to that moment of shared vulnerability that had subtly altered the balance of their relationship. "About that," Clara began, feeling the need to clarify what was happening. "I don't want you to think I expect anything different because I listened to you that night. My job here—" "I'm not confusing things, if that's what worries you," Julian interrupted softly. "I'm just acknowledging that in this house full of people, you were the only one who truly saw me, and that means something to me." The sincerity in his voice moved her. It wasn't the calculated tone of the businessman used to getting what he wanted, but the voice of a man acknowledging an unexpected connection. "It meant something to me too," Clara admitted, letting down her guard for an instant. "It was the first time in a long time that someone listened to me without judging me for my position or my circumstances." The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious, until the oven timer broke the spell. Clara moved away to take the baked fish out, grateful for the distraction that allowed her to recompose herself. "Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes, she announced, returning to her role as the efficient employee. "Do you prefer to eat in the dining room or on the terrace?" Julian seemed to grasp her need to re-establish some distance, because he adopted a more formal tone in replying. "On the terrace, please. The evening is pleasant." He headed towards the door, but stopped before leaving. Clara spoke softly. "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" The invitation took her completely by surprise. In 2 years of service, she had never shared a table with her employer. "I don't think it's appropriate," she replied automatically, although a part of her wanted to accept. "It probably isn't," he conceded with a resigned smile. "But I'd like to continue our conversation, without roles or expectations, just 2 people sharing a meal, and perhaps some honesty." Clara hesitated. All her training told her she should politely refuse the invitation, keep the boundaries clear. But something had changed between them, something that couldn't be ignored so easily. "All right," she found herself saying, surprising herself. "But I must finish my chores first." Julian's smile illuminated his face in a way that transformed him completely. "Of course. I'll wait for you." The gala and the confession. The dinner on the terrace had fundamentally changed something between them. While Clara served Julian breakfast 3 weeks later, she vividly recalled that evening, the conversation flowing effortlessly, Julian's laughter, genuine, without the usual reserve, and the way the moon illuminated his features, softening them. They had talked for hours about literature, their childhoods, abandoned dreams, and persistent hopes. For one night, the roles of employer and employee had vanished, leaving 2 people discovering each other. However, the next morning, reality had returned with the force of gravity. Clara had returned to her uniform and her duties, and Julian to his meetings and international calls. If anything had changed between them, it was only apparent in small details. A furtive smile during breakfast, a new book mysteriously appearing in her room each week, a question about her mother that revealed he listened and remembered her worries. Julian, without announcement or fanfare, had increased her salary by 30% after that dinner, citing a long overdue compensation review. Clara knew it was his discreet way of helping without hurting her pride. "Good morning, Clara," Julian greeted her, entering the dining room impeccably dressed in a gray suit that accentuated the blue of his eyes. "How is your mother today?" "Better, thank you for asking," she replied, serving the coffee exactly how he liked it. Black, unsweetened. "The new medication seems to be working." What she didn't mention was that this new medication was an experimental treatment that until recently had been out of her financial reach. "I'm glad to hear it," he replied, unfolding the newspaper, but not completely taking his attention off her. "Have you made progress with the book I lent you?" "I've almost finished it," Clara confessed. "It's fascinating how Cortázar plays with the reader's perception, although I must admit I had to reread some passages several times. The first time I read it, I thought I was going crazy," Julian commented with a smile, lowering the newspaper to look at her directly. "Maybe we could discuss it when you finish. If you're interested, of course." The proposal hung between them, loaded with implicit meanings. It wasn't simply an invitation to talk about literature. It was a half-open door to something more, something they both sensed, but neither dared to name. "I would love to," Clara replied, aware that she was accepting much more than a literary discussion. The moment was interrupted by Julian's phone. He frowned, clearly annoyed by the interruption, but answered with his usual professional tone. The expression on his face immediately changed, tightening with worry. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice suddenly grave. "I understand. We're coming right over." When he hung up, his face had paled noticeably. "What's wrong?" Clara asked, alarmed by his expression. "It's your mother," he replied, grabbing his jacket. "She's been taken to the hospital. Apparently she had a severe episode this morning." The world seemed to stop for Clara. Her mother had had ups and downs in recent years, but she had always managed to stabilize. A severe episode sounded ominously final. "I have to go," she murmured, feeling her legs barely supporting her. "We're going," Julian corrected, gently taking her arm. "I'll take you." A debt beyond payment, the drive to the hospital passed in a tense silence, broken only by the sound of rain against the car windows. Julian kept a hand over Clara's, a silent anchor in the midst of the emotional storm threatening to sweep her away. Upon arrival, they were greeted by Dr. Rojas, a woman with a tired appearance, but a compassionate gaze. "How is my mother?" Clara asked. Died without preamble. "Stable, for now," the doctor replied. "But I won't lie to you, Miss Davis. Your mother suffered a severe heart failure. We managed to stabilize her, but her heart is very weak." "Will she recover?" The question came out as a desperate whisper. Dr. Rojas exchanged a look with Julian before answering, as if assessing how much truth Clara could bear at that moment. "There is a treatment," she finally said. "A surgical intervention that could help. But it is experimental and—" She paused significantly. "It is not covered by insurance." Clara felt the ground open up beneath her feet. Even with her improved salary, experimental surgery was completely out of her reach. It was a cruel irony. After years of struggle, when she had finally achieved some stability, she was once again facing the impotence of not being able to help her dearest loved one. "How much?" Julian asked, his voice firm and decisive. "Mr. Vance, I don't think—" the doctor began. "How much does the operation cost?" he insisted. "Approximately $200,000, considering the surgery and subsequent care. An impossible sum for Clara, but an insignificant figure for someone like Julian." Before she could fully process what was happening, Julian was already pulling out his phone. "Do it," he ordered the doctor. "My assistant will contact the hospital to arrange the financial details immediately." "Julian, I can't accept," Clara began, but he interrupted her gently. "Not now, Clara. Your mother needs that operation. We can discuss the details later." There was a determination in his voice that brooked no argument. It wasn't the authoritarian tone of the millionaire accustomed to his orders being followed without question. It was the resolve of a man who simply could not stand by and watch someone he cared about suffer. "Can I see her?" Clara asked the doctor, fighting back tears. "Of course, follow me." Julian stayed behind, giving her the space she needed for this moment. As he watched her walk away down the hospital corridor, his face reflected a mixture of worry and a deeper emotion, something he had never felt for any of the women who had passed through his life. The confession in the quiet room. The room where Teresa Davis was fighting for her life was small, but bright. Connected to multiple machines monitoring her vital signs, she seemed to have aged 10 years since Clara had last seen her. "Mom," Clara whispered, gently taking her hand. Teresa opened her eyes slowly, a weak smile forming on her pale lips. "My girl," she murmured in a voice barely audible. "Don't make that face. It's not as bad as it looks." It was so typical of her mother to try and comfort her, even in these circumstances. Clara forced a smile through the tears she could no longer hold back. "They're going to operate on you, Mom. A special surgery that will help you recover." Teresa frowned, her maternal instinct immediately kicking in. "Clara, you know we can't afford—" "Don't worry about that now," she interrupted, gently squeezing her hand. "Everything is arranged." A spark of understanding shone in Teresa's tired eyes. "Him," she simply said, not as a question, but as a confirmation. Clara nodded, unable to explain the complexity of her feelings at that moment. The immense gratitude toward Julian, mixed with the fear of depending on him, of owing him something so significant, of the dynamic between them changing irreparably because of this impossible-to-repay debt. "He's a good man," Teresa murmured, briefly closing her eyes from fatigue. "I saw it in his eyes that time he came to pick you up." "Rest, Mom," Clara replied, gently stroking her forehead. "I'll be here when you wake up." The unspoken truth. When she returned to the waiting room, she found Julian speaking quietly with Dr. Rojas. Both fell silent as she approached, which immediately piqued her worry. "Is there something I should know?" she asked directly. The doctor and Julian exchanged a glance before she replied. "We were discussing the surgery details. Dr. Fierro, a specialist in this procedure, can fly from Houston tomorrow." There was something in her tone, a caution that suggested withheld information. But before Clara could press, Julian intervened. "Everything is arranged, Clara. The best specialist, the best team. Teresa will receive the attention she needs." The hours leading up to Teresa's operation were the longest in Clara's life. Sitting in the waiting room, with an untouched cup of coffee in her hands, she watched the clock's second hand move with exasperating slowness. Julian remained by her side, a constant, silent presence, respecting her need to process everything. "You don't have to stay," Clara murmured, when the dawn began to peek through the hospital windows. "You must have important meetings." "Nothing is more important than this," he replied with a simplicity that would disarm any argument. "Than being here, with you." Clara looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw beyond the facade of the powerful businessman. She saw the child who had lost his mother too soon, the young man forced to abandon his dreams for family expectations, the man who, having everything material, was still searching for an authentic connection. "Thank you," she said, without specifying for what exactly. For the money for the operation, for staying with her, for truly seeing her when she was invisible to the rest of the world. He took her hand, a simple gesture yet heavy with meaning. They said no more. It wasn't necessary. When Dr. Rojas finally appeared, her expression was unreadable. Clara jumped up, her heart pounding so hard she feared it could be heard throughout the room. "The operation was a success," the doctor announced with a tired smile. "Dr. Fierro did an exceptional job. Teresa is stable, and her vital signs are promising. Clara felt her legs give way from the relief. Julian held her just in time, a firm arm around her waist. "Can I see her?" she asked, tears streaming freely down her face. "In a few hours, when she comes out of the anesthesia," the doctor replied. "In the meantime, I suggest you go home. Get some rest. We will call you immediately when Teresa wakes up." The idea of leaving the hospital, even for a few hours, seemed unthinkable. But the exhaustion of the night began to take its toll on Clara. "My chauffeur can take you home," Julian offered. "I don't want to be alone," Clara confessed, surprising herself with the frankness of her words. A look of understanding crossed Julian's face. "Then come with me," he said, with a softness that contrasted with his usual commanding voice. "There are plenty of guest rooms in the mansion." The drive was silent, Clara leaning against Julian's shoulder, too emotionally and physically exhausted to maintain the formalities that normally governed their relationship. When they arrived, he personally led her to a guest room, not the one she had used to prepare for the gala, but one closer to his own quarters. "Rest," he said, stopping at the door. "I'll wake you if there's news from the hospital." Clara nodded, too tired to speak. But as he turned to leave, something compelled her to stop him. "Julian," Clara called softly. "Could we talk just for a moment?" He returned, sitting on the edge of the bed as she settled among the pillows. "Everything you've done for my mother, for me," Clara began, the words forming with difficulty. "I don't know how I could ever repay you." "I don't want you to repay me," Julian replied, with an intensity that startled her. "It's not a loan, Clara. It's not a debt. It's what you do for someone you care about." The implication of his words hung between them, almost tangible. "You care about me?" she asked, meeting his gaze. "More than I ever imagined anyone could matter to me," he confessed, with a vulnerability he had never shown before. "These months knowing you have fundamentally changed something in me." Clara felt a lump in her throat. It was the confirmation of something they had both been skirting around for weeks, without daring to name it. "I'm scared," she admitted, "of what I'm feeling, of how complicated everything is." "Me too," he replied. And that simple confession, coming from the man who faced boardrooms and multi-million-dollar negotiations without blinking, moved something deep within Clara. "What do we do then?" she asked. Julian took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. "We could start by acknowledging what we both already know," he said softly. "That what's between us goes beyond employer and employee, beyond friendship. That it's something neither of us was looking for, but we found anyway." "People will talk," Clara murmured, voicing one of her biggest fears. "They'll say I'm with you for your money, for what you can offer me." "People always talk," he replied with a sad smile. "When I was with Vanessa, they said it was for the corporate merger. When I was alone, they speculated about my preferences. We can't live dependent on what others think, Clara." He was right, of course. "And yet, I can never give you what someone from your world could offer you," she said, expressing the fear that had been gnawing at her heart. "I have no connections, no influence, no—" "The only thing I want you to give me is exactly what you've already given me," Julian interrupted her. "Honesty, authenticity, the ability to see me as a person, not a last name or a bank account." His words resonated deeply with Clara, dissolving some of her insecurities. But exhaustion was finally winning her over, her eyelids growing heavier. "You should rest," he said, noticing her struggle to stay awake. "We'll talk more when you've slept." He leaned in, and with a tenderness that contrasted with his imposing appearance, he placed a soft kiss on her forehead. The gesture, as intimate as it was chaste, was like a seal on the words they had exchanged. Clara slept deeply, dreamlessly, her body and mind recovering from the emotional exhaustion. When she woke up, the afternoon light filtered through the curtains, bathing the room in golden tones. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Ding up. Julian entered, holding a phone. "It's Dr. Rojas," he said, handing her the device. "Teresa is awake." With trembling hands, Clara took the phone. The conversation was brief, but charged with emotion. Teresa was stable, responding well to the treatment. She could visit her that very afternoon. When she returned the phone to Julian, tears were streaming freely down her face, but this time, they were tears of relief and joy. "She's okay," she said, her voice choked. "My mother is okay." Without a word, Julian sat beside her and pulled her close. Clara allowed herself to lean against his chest, listening to the steady, comforting beat of his heart. For a moment, they simply existed together in that space of shared vulnerability. "There's something I need to tell you," Julian finally murmured, without letting go. "Something I've wanted to tell you for weeks, but couldn't find the right words." Clara looked up, meeting those blue eyes she could now read so clearly. "I'm listening," she simply said. "All my life I've sought success, recognition, power," he began. "I thought if I accumulated enough of all that, I would eventually find the happiness I vaguely remembered from my childhood. But the more I had, the emptier I felt." He paused, as if searching for the precise words to express something deeply personal. "And then you came along," he continued, "not asking for anything from me, except a fair salary for your work. Unimpressed by my last name or my bank account, truly seeing me beyond the facade I've built for years." He took Clara's hands in his, a gesture that had become familiar and comforting to both. "I'm falling in love with you, Clara Davis," he said with devastating simplicity. "I probably already am in love, if I'm completely honest with myself. And I perfectly understand if you don't feel the same, or if you need time, or if—" Clara couldn't let him finish the sentence. In an act of courage that surprised even herself, she leaned in and gently pressed her lips against his. A tentative, almost shy kiss, but one that contained all the words she didn't yet dare to speak. When they parted, Julian looked at her in astonishment, as if he had received an unexpected and invaluable gift. "I'm falling in love with you too," Clara confessed, "and it terrifies me, because our worlds are so different, because there are so many complications, so many obstacles. We will face every obstacle together," he promised. "One day at a time, no pressure, no impossible expectations, just us figuring out this path together." Hours later, when they walked hand in hand into the hospital room where Teresa was recovering, the weak but knowing smile of her mother told them they didn't need explanations. Some things are evident to the eyes that know how to see. "It was about time," Teresa commented in a tired but firm voice. "I wondered how long it would take you two to figure it out." Julian laughed softly, a sound Clara had come to treasure for its rarity and authenticity. "Your daughter is quite stubborn, Mrs. Davis. And you quite intimidating, young man," Teresa countered, with a familiarity that surprised them both. An interesting combination. As they watched Teresa gradually regain her strength in the following days, Clara and Julian also learned to navigate their new relationship. It wasn't easy. There were curious glances from the mansion staff, barely disguised questions. Even an article in a society magazine speculating about the mysterious woman who had conquered the city's most coveted bachelor. But every obstacle they faced together seemed to strengthen what they had built. Each evening in the library, each walk in the garden, each sincere conversation about their fears and hopes wove a stronger bond between them. A month after the operation, while Teresa was recovering in the room Julian had insisted on preparing for her in the mansion, Clara found a small box on her pillow. Inside was an antique key and a note written in the elegant handwriting she already knew so well. "So you can enter the library at any time, without having to wait for everyone to sleep. It's your space as much as mine now, like everything I have, if you wish it. It wasn't a formal proposal, nor a grand declaration. It was exactly what Clara needed. One more step on this path they had decided to travel together, respecting their timing and their process. That night, as they gazed at the stars from the terrace, their hands intertwined and their hearts beating in unison, Clara understood that sometimes the most improbable stories are precisely the ones that were meant to happen. That sometimes life places exactly the person we need in our path, even if they come from the most unexpected place. And that sometimes true love isn't announced with fireworks, but grows silently, day by day, in every shared glance, every honest conversation, every moment of mutual vulnerability. The employee and the billionaire, two worlds that should never have met, now united by the oldest and most powerful bridge, two hearts that recognized each other amidst the chaos of life, two souls that found in the other exactly what they didn't know they were looking for. Tuyệt vời. Đây là bản dịch tiếng Anh cho phần kết thúc mơ đầy kịch tính của câu chuyện Julian và Clara. Open ending. The truth in the library. Hours later, as Clara awoke, the late afternoon light filtered through the curtains, bathing Julian's luxurious penthouse guest room in a soft, golden hue. She held her phone, her heart swelling with relief. Her mother was stable. When she returned the phone to Julian, her eyes were wet, but this time, with pure joy. Julian sat down next to her, pulling her close. In that moment of shared vulnerability, the distance between them almost vanished. "There's something I have to tell you," Julian murmured, his voice low and utterly sincere. "I spent my whole life chasing power and recognition, but the more I had, the emptier I felt. And then you showed up. You saw me, not the last name or the bank account." He took her hand, his voice clear and resolute. "Clara Davis, I'm falling in love with you. I'm already in love with you, to be completely honest." Clara returned his gaze with a soft kiss, an acknowledgement tinged with fear. "I'm falling in love with you too," she confessed, "and it terrifies me, because our worlds are so different. There are too many obstacles. We will face every obstacle together," he promised. "One step at a time, no pressure." The final chapter. The library's truth. Clara's mother recovered quickly. Julian arranged for her to stay in a lavish guest suite in the mansion, ensuring she had the best care. Clara continued her work, but her role had changed. She was no longer just an employee. She was Julian's undeclared partner in life. Every evening, Julian and Clara met in the library. They talked about literature, about her mother, and about their abandoned dreams. They were building a relationship on a foundation of truth, but that truth clashed severely with the outside world. Julian knew he had to go public, but he also knew the moment he announced that the woman he loved was not an heiress or a CEO, but the woman who once wore the maid's uniform, would be the first shot in a social and media war. The $200,000 debt for her mother's surgery, which he refused to call a debt, would be proof for the detractors. A month later, Julian invited Clara to a major charity gala where the city's elite would gather. "Are you ready to face all of it?" he asked her, his voice mixing challenge and concern. "Ready for them to say you're only with me because I saved your mother? That you don't belong in that world?" Clara looked into his deep blue eyes, where she found her peace. She knew Julian had found his truth, but now she had to find hers. Could she step into that world with dignity, or would she be defined by her past and his wealth? "I don't know if I belong in that world," Clara said, taking his hand. "But I want to know if our love is strong enough to make that world irrelevant." They stood there, in the quiet library, surrounded by thousands of books filled with finished stories. but their story was still unwritten. Tonight, they would step out, facing the flashing lights and the whispers, to see if the love between an employee and a billionaire was a brief chapter or a lifelong saga. Their future is not a foregone conclusion, but a gamble staked on the honesty between two people, against the skepticism of the whole world. Do you want to write the next chapter, detailing the dramatic events of the gala, or would you prefer to move on to a new story?